Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the stars drift past through the main viewing screen. His ship had been traveling through deep space for 3 months now, searching for new worlds and new forms of life. The mission was simple: explore, make contact, and report back to Earth Command. The Defiance was humanity's most advanced exploration ship. She was fast, well-armed, and equipped with the best technology Earth could build. Morrison had commanded her for 2 years, and in that time, they had discovered 6 new star systems and made first contact with 3 alien species. All of them had been peaceful encounters. Morrison was a tall man with gray hair and steady blue eyes. He had served in the Earth Navy for 20 years before taking command of the Defiance. His crew trusted him completely, and he trusted them. They were good people, all of them handpicked for this mission. Chief Engineer Lisa Carter walked onto the bridge, carrying a datapad in her hands. She was a small woman with dark hair and quick, intelligent eyes. She had been working on the ship's engines for the past week, trying to squeeze more speed out of them. "Captain," she said, "I'm picking up something strange on the long-range sensors. It looks like a distress signal, but it's not coming from any human ship." Morrison turned to face her. "Where is it coming from?" "About 6 light years from here. The signal is weak, but it's definitely a call for help. The language is unknown, but the universal distress pattern is clear." Tactical Officer Ryan Brooks looked up from his station. He was a young man with brown hair and sharp green eyes. He had joined the crew straight from the academy, but he had proven himself to be one of the best tactical officers in the fleet. "Captain," Brooks said, "I'm reading multiple energy signatures in that system. Some of them are massive." Whatever is happening there, it's big, Morrison thought for a moment. The Defiance's mission was exploration, but they also had a duty to help anyone in distress, set course for the signal source, maximum speed. The journey took 2 days. As they got closer to the source of the distress signal, the sensors began picking up more details. There were several planets in the system, and one of them was dying. Communications specialist Amy Foster was a young woman with blonde hair and bright blue eyes. She had been working on translating the alien distress signal since they first detected it. She finally managed to break through to the bridge with news. "Captain," Foster said, "I've managed to translate part of the message. It's coming from a species called the Kaleri. They're saying something about sky gods who have come to destroy their world." Morrison frowned. "Sky gods? That's what they call them. The message says these sky gods have been attacking their cities and taking their people. The Kaleri are begging for help from anyone who can hear them." The Defiance dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. What they saw made everyone on the bridge fall silent. The 3rd planet in the system was burning. Great. Sections of its surface glowed red with fire, and massive ships hung in orbit around it like metal vultures. The ships were unlike anything Morrison had ever seen. They were sleek and beautiful, with smooth curves and golden hulls that seemed to shine with their own light. "My God," Brooks whispered, "there must be 50 of those ships." Carter checked her sensors. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy weapons firing down at the planet's surface. Those ships are bombarding the cities below." Morrison's jaw tightened. He had seen war before, but this looked like something else entirely. This looked like extermination. "Take us in closer," he ordered, "but keep us hidden. I want to know what we're dealing with before we make any moves." The Defiance moved carefully through the outer system, using asteroids and debris to hide from the attacking fleet. As they got closer, they could see the true scale of the destruction. Entire continents on the planet below were covered in smoke and fire. Foster's communications equipment picked up broadcasts from the attacking ships. The language was different from the Kaleri distress signals, but she managed to translate some of it. "Captain," she said, "the attackers are calling themselves Zephyrians. They're broadcasting some kind of religious message to the planet below. They're saying that resistance is futile because they are gods, and gods cannot be defeated by lesser beings." Brooks looked up from his tactical display. "Captain, those ships have technology I've never seen before." Their shields are using some kind of energy manipulation that our computers can't analyze. And their weapons, they're not just destroying buildings. They're reshaping the landscape itself. Morrison studied the tactical display. The Zephyrian ships moved with perfect coordination, like dancers following a carefully planned routine. There was something almost ceremonial about the way they attacked. It wasn't just war, it was a display of power. "Captain," Carter said, "I'm detecting a small ship trying to escape the planet's atmosphere. It's badly damaged and won't make it far. Can we reach it before those Zephyrian ships notice?" "Maybe, if we're fast and lucky," Morrison made his decision. "Do it. Bring that ship aboard." The Defiance moved quickly, using its advanced stealth systems to avoid detection. They managed to catch the escaping ship in their cargo bay just as its engines failed completely. The ship's single occupant was an alien, unlike any they had encountered before. He was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large, dark eyes. His clothes were torn and burned, and he looked exhausted. Foster worked with the ship's translation computers to communicate with the alien. After an hour, they were able to have a basic conversation. The alien's name was Vexhai, and he was one of the last leaders of the Kaleri people. He told them a story that made Morrison's blood run cold. "The sky gods came to our world 3 days ago," Vexhai said through the translator. "They demanded that we surrender completely and accept them as our rulers. When we refused, they began destroying our cities." Morrison leaned forward. "Why do they call themselves gods?" "Because that is what they believe," Vexhai replied. "The Zephyrians have conquered 12 star systems. In each one, they have convinced the local population that they are divine beings sent to rule over lesser species. Those who resist are destroyed. Those who surrender become slaves." Brooks asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "How long have they been doing this?" "According to our records, the Zephyrian Empire has existed for over 3,000 years. They have enslaved hundreds of different species. No one has ever successfully resisted them." Carter shook her head. "How is that possible?" "No technology." "Is that advanced?" Vexhai's expression grew sad. "It is not just their technology, though that is formidable. It is their method. They arrive at a world and demonstrate their power through displays that seem impossible to the local population. They use gravity manipulation, energy shields, and weapons that can crack planets. To most species, such things seem like magic." "But you know better," Morrison said. "My people are scientists. We know that what appears to be magic is simply technology we do not understand." But knowing this did not help us when their weapons began falling from the sky. Foster looked at the tactical display showing the dying planet below. "Are there any other survivors? Perhaps?" "The Zephyrians do not usually kill everyone immediately. They prefer to leave some alive as examples, to spread fear to other worlds. But my world is finished. Soon, there will be nothing left but ash and slaves." Morrison stood up and walked to the viewing screen. The Zephyrian ships continued their methodical destruction of the planet below. He had seen enough war to recognize genocide when he saw it. "Tell me about their military tactics," he said to Vexhai. The alien looked confused. "Military tactics? How do they fight? What strategies do they use?" Vexhai thought for a moment. "They do not fight as you might understand. They arrive, make demands, and then demonstrate their power until their enemies surrender. If surrender does not come quickly enough, they destroy everything. There is no ... strategy, as you call it. They simply overwhelm their opponents with superior technology." Morrison felt something cold settle in his stomach. An empire that had never learned to truly fight. An enemy that relied on fear and superior technology rather than tactics and strategy. Brooks seemed to understand what the captain was thinking. "Sir, are you considering engaging them?" Morrison looked around the bridge at his crew. They were good people, and they were brave, but they were only one ship against 50. Still, he had taken an oath when he accepted command of the Defiance. That oath included protecting innocent life wherever it might be found. "Not yet," he said finally. "First, we need to learn everything we can about these Zephyrians." If they've never faced real military opposition, they might not be as invincible as they think. Vexhai looked up at him with something that might have been hope. You would fight the sky gods? Morrison smiled grimly. We're human, Vexhai. We don't believe in gods. And we've been fighting wars since before we could walk upright. If the Zephyrians want to play God, they're about to learn that humans have a very long history of killing things that claim to be divine. High Archon Zelenara sat on her golden throne in the heart of the Zephyrian capital ship. The throne room was massive, with walls that curved up into darkness above. Holographic displays showed her the conquest of the Kaleri world below. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Zelenara was tall and elegant, with pale silver skin that seemed to glow in the dim light. Her eyes were completely black, without any visible pupils. She wore robes of deep blue that floated around her as if moved by an invisible wind. To her subjects, she appeared to be a goddess made flesh. Commander Veltar approached the throne and knelt before her. He was younger than most Zephyrian nobles, with the same silver skin and black eyes as his leader. His uniform was decorated with symbols of his rank and his many victories. Divine Archon, he said in a voice filled with reverence, the Kaleri. Resistance has been broken. Their cities burn and the survivors beg for mercy. The conquest will be complete within one solar cycle. Zelenara nodded slowly. Excellent. Send word to our other fleets. We shall expand our search for new worlds to conquer. The galaxy must learn that the age of the Zephyrians has only just begun. Veltar hesitated. My lady, there is one small matter. Our scouts have reported contact with an unknown species in the outer systems. They call themselves humans. Humans? Zelenara's voice carried a note of mild interest. What manner of beings are they? They appear to be similar to many other species we have encountered. Bipedal, primitive technology scattered across several worlds. Our scouts attempted to deliver the standard terms of surrender, but the humans gave an unusual response. Zelenara leaned forward slightly. In 3,000 years of conquest, very few species had given unusual responses to Zephyrian demands. What did they say? They said no, my lady. They refused to acknowledge our divine authority. When our scouts demonstrated their power by destroying one of their orbital stations, the humans responded with weapons fire. For a moment, the throne room was completely silent. Zelenara had not heard of any species that responded to Zephyrian power with violence since the early days of the Empire. Most civilizations either surrendered immediately or tried to negotiate. None simply said no and started shooting. How many humans are there? She asked. Our intelligence suggests they control approximately 12 worlds, with a total population of roughly 8 billion. Their technology appears to be several centuries behind our own. Zelenara smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Then they will learn quickly why resistance is futile. Send Fleet Commander Zexhai with 100 ships to their nearest world. Make an example of them that will be remembered throughout the galaxy. Far across the galaxy, Commander Pete Jackson stood in the command center of New Denver Colony. The colony was built on a world that humans had named Hope's Landing, and it was home to nearly 2 million people. Jackson was a big man with broad shoulders and graying hair. He had fought in 3 wars before coming to the frontier to help protect the colonies. The command center was busy with activity. Technicians monitored defensive systems while communications officers tried to maintain contact with other human worlds. Everyone knew that something was coming. The question was when and how bad it would be. Lieutenant Sarah Miller ran into the command center carrying a datapad. She was young and nervous, but Jackson trusted her judgment. She had been monitoring deep space sensors for the past week. Sir, she said, we're detecting multiple faster-than-light signatures approaching the system. 67 ships, all moving in perfect formation. They'll be here in 6 hours? Jackson felt his stomach tighten. 67 ships was more than the entire human defense fleet. But he had been a soldier for too long to panic now. Sound the general alarm, he ordered. All military personnel to battle stations. Begin evacuating civilians to the underground shelters. And get me a direct line to Earth Command. The next few hours passed quickly. Jackson's Marines prepared defensive positions around the colony's main facilities. The orbital defense platforms powered up their weapons and shields. Transport ships began moving civilians to safety in the asteroid belt. When the Zephyrian fleet finally arrived, Jackson was ready for them. He stood in the command center, watching the tactical display as 67 golden ships dropped out. Of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, the lead ship opened a communication channel. The face that appeared on the main screen was unmistakably alien, with silver skin and completely black eyes. When it spoke, the translation came through clearly. "I am Fleet Commander Zexhai of the Divine Zephyrian Empire. You will surrender immediately and accept our rule, or you will be destroyed. You have one of your hours to comply." Jackson looked around the command center at his people. They were scared, but they were ready to fight. He opened the communication channel. "This is Commander Pete Jackson of the New Denver Colony Defense Force. We reject your demands. This is human space, and we will defend it." Zexhai looked surprised. "You dare to refuse the divine will of the Zephyrian Empire? We are gods among mortals. Your weapons cannot harm us." "And I guess you're about to find out what mortal weapons can do," Jackson replied and cut the communication. The battle began. Immediately, the Zephyrian ships moved forward in a perfect formation, their shields glowing with energy. They expected the humans to panic and scatter when faced with such overwhelming force. Instead, Jackson's forces did something no Zephyrian commander had seen before. They fought back intelligently. The orbital defense platforms opened fire with concentrated missile barrages, targeting the lead ships. When the Zephyrian energy shields absorbed the first wave of attacks, the humans immediately switched tactics. Jackson had studied every piece of intelligence about Zephyrian technology that human scouts had gathered. Their shields were powerful, but they seemed to work by dispersing energy over a wide area. What happened if you concentrated all your firepower on a single point? "All platforms, focus fire on the lead ship," he ordered. "Everything we have, right at their forward shield grid." Dozens of missiles and energy beams struck the lead Zephyrian ship at exactly the same point. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the shield flickered and failed, and the ship's hull cracked open like an egg. Zexhai stared at his tactical display in shock. No species had ever managed to penetrate Zephyrian shields. It was impossible. Yet somehow these primitive humans had destroyed one of his ships in the first few minutes of battle. "All ships, advance and destroy the human positions," he ordered, but the humans had more surprises waiting. As the Zephyrian ships moved closer to the planet, they ran into a minefield that Jackson's engineers had spent the past week laying. The mines were crude by Zephyrian standards, but they were invisible to Zephyrian sensors and packed with enough explosive to damage even shielded ships. 3 more Zephyrian vessels were destroyed before Zexhai realized what was happening. The humans were not fighting like any species the Zephyrians had encountered before. They were using tactics, strategy, and deception instead of simply trying to match superior technology with superior technology on the planet's surface. Jackson's Marines were ready for the landing assault. The Zephyrians sent down their ground forces in the traditional manner, beautiful golden transports that landed in open areas and disgorged troops in perfect formation. Sergeant Tony Martinez had been a Marine for 15 years. He had fought against human enemies, alien pirates, and robotic defense systems. He had never fought against beings who thought they were gods, but he figured the principle was the same. Find their weakness and exploit it. The Zephyrian ground troops were tall and elegant, wearing armor that seemed to be made of liquid metal. They carried energy weapons that could cut through solid rock. They moved across the battlefield with the confidence of beings who had never known defeat. Martinez and his Marines hit them from 3 directions at once. The Zephyrians had expected the humans to meet them in open battle, where superior technology would determine the outcome. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that used cover, concealment, and coordinated fire to turn their own advantages against them. Human soldiers hid in buildings and behind rocks, striking at the Zephyrian flanks and then disappearing before return fire could find them. When the Zephyrians tried to regroup, They found themselves walking into carefully prepared ambush. Martinez watched through his scope as a group of Zephyrian soldiers tried to cross an open courtyard. They moved with perfect discipline, their energy shields protecting them from direct fire. But Martinez had not become a sergeant by fighting fair. The explosives his team had planted under the courtyard turned the disciplined advance into chaos. Zephyrian soldiers who had never experienced fear suddenly found themselves scattered and confused. Their perfect formations broken, now, Martinez shouted, and his Marines opened fire from 6 different positions. The battle for New Denver Colony lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the human defenders had suffered heavy casualties, but they had achieved something that no species had accomplished in 3,000 years. They had defeated a Zephyrian fleet in open combat. Zexhia's surviving ships retreated to the edge of the system, their golden hulls scarred and blackened. The fleet commander stared at the tactical display. Admiral Susan Hayes stood in the war room deep inside Earth Command headquarters. The room was filled with holographic displays showing star maps, fleet positions, and battle reports from across human space. The news was not good. Hayes was a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and steel blue eyes. She had commanded ships in 3 major conflicts and was considered one of humanity's best military strategists. Now she faced the greatest challenge of her career. "Show me the latest intelligence reports," she said to her aide, Colonel Dan White. White activated the main display. Red markers appeared on the star map, showing Zephyrian fleet movements. There were far too many of them. "Ma'am, our scouts report that the Zephyrians have assembled a grand fleet of over 200 ships. They're moving toward the Tau Ceti system, where our main colonies are located. Based on their current speed, they'll arrive in 6 days." Hayes studied the display. 200 ships against humanity's entire defense fleet of 30 vessels. The odds were impossible by any reasonable measure. "What do we know about their tactics after the New Denver battle?" Lieutenant Commander Eric Stone stepped forward. He was a young man with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes. Stone had spent the past month analyzing every piece of data from the colonial defense battles. "Admiral, the Zephyrians have made some changes since their first defeat. They're using wider formations and more aggressive attacks. But their fundamental approach hasn't changed. They still fight like they're dispensing divine judgment rather than engaging in actual warfare." Hayes nodded. This was what she had hoped to hear. "Explain." Stone activated a tactical display showing the battle patterns from recent engagements. The Zephyrians always attack in perfect formations. They make dramatic displays of power before engaging. They expect their enemies to be intimidated and surrender. When that doesn't happen, they rely on overwhelming firepower rather than strategic thinking. What about their ship designs? Their vessels are built for intimidation and ceremony rather than pure combat effectiveness. They're beautiful and powerful, but they're not designed by people who have fought real wars. Their shields are strong but inflexible. Their weapons are devastating but predictable. Hayes smiled grimly. "And their commanders? That's their biggest weakness, ma'am? Every Zephyrian commander we've encountered fights the same way. They make demands, they make threats, they attack in formation, and they expect to win through superior technology. None of them have shown any real tactical innovation." Hayes turned to address the room full of officers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to face an enemy that outnumbers us 7-1. By all conventional measures, we should surrender now and save ourselves the trouble of dying." The room was silent. Everyone knew the odds. "But," Hayes continued, "this enemy has never fought a real war. They've spent 3,000 years bullying weaker civilizations into submission. They don't know how to adapt when their standard tactics fail. They don't know how to respond to an enemy that refuses to be intimidated." She activated another display showing the positions of human defense fleets throughout the system. "We're going to teach them what happens when gods try to fight soldiers." Captain Morrison received his orders while the Defiance was still hiding in the outer system where they had first encountered the Zephyrians. His ship would play a crucial role in the coming battle. Chief Engineer Lisa Carter had been working around the clock to modify the ship's sensor systems. The new equipment could track Zephyrian ships through their energy shields and predict their movement patterns. "Captain," she said, "the modifications are complete. We can now provide targeting data for the entire fleet. The Zephyrians won't be able to hide behind their pretty light shows anymore." Tactical Officer Ryan Brooks was studying the latest intelligence reports when Communications Specialist Amy Foster brought him disturbing news. "Ryan, I've been monitoring Zephyrian communications. They're not just talking about conquering our colonies anymore. They're talking about making an example of Earth itself. High Archon Zelenara has ordered the complete destruction of our home world." Brooks felt a chill run down his spine. "How many ships are they sending?" "All of them. Every ship in their grand fleet. They want to make sure that no other species ever dares to resist them again." Morrison gathered his senior officers in the ship's briefing room. The mood was grim but determined. "People," he said, "we're about to participate in the largest space battle in human history. Our job is to coordinate the fleet's movements and provide targeting information for our ships. If we fail, Earth dies." Carter spoke up. "Captain, I've been thinking about the Zephyrian shield technology. Their shields are designed to disperse energy attacks over a wide area. But what if we hit them with something that isn't energy?" "What do you mean?" "Kinetic weapons. Good old-fashioned projectiles moving at high speed. Their shields might not be able to handle that kind of impact." Brooks nodded. "We could modify our missile warheads. Remove the explosive charges and replace them with dense metal cores. Turn them into high-speed bullets." Morrison smiled. "Do it, and make sure every ship in the fleet gets the modification specifications." The human defense fleet assembled in the Tau Ceti system 3 days before the Zephyrians arrived. Admiral Hayes commanded from her flagship, the UES Retribution, a massive battleship that had been humanity's most powerful warship until this moment. The fleet was arranged in 3 groups, each with a specific mission. The first group would engage the Zephyrian main force directly. The second would attack their flanks using hit-and-run tactics. The third, including Morrison's Defiance, would coordinate the battle and strike at targets of opportunity. When the Zephyrian Grand Fleet finally arrived, it was a sight that took everyone's breath away. 200 golden ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. They moved with an elegance that was almost artistic, their hulls gleaming in the light of the system's star. High Archon Zelenara herself commanded the fleet from her personal dreadnought, a ship so large it could have housed a small city. She opened communications with the human forces. Her image appeared on screens throughout the human fleet. She was even more imposing than the descriptions had suggested, with her silver skin seeming to glow with inner light and her black eyes reflecting nothing. "Mortals," she said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you have defied the divine will of the Zephyrian Empire. You have resisted our righteous rule and brought violence against our sacred forces. For these crimes, your species will be erased from existence." Admiral Hayes responded from the bridge of the Retribution. "This is Admiral Susan Hayes of the United Earth Defense Fleet. We reject your claims of divinity. We will defend our worlds and our people against any threat, whether it comes from mortals or from beings who think they're gods." Zelenara's expression did not change. "Then you will die as fools die, believing in false hope until the very end." The communication ended and the battle began. The Zephyrian fleet advanced in their traditional formation, expecting the humans to scatter or attempt to flee. Instead, they encountered something they had never seen before, a coordinated defense that used their own predictability against them. Admiral Hayes had studied every report from the colonial battles. She knew exactly how the Zephyrians would attack, and she was ready for them. The first Zephyrian wave came in straight lines, their ships firing energy beams that could cut through solid rock. The human ships scattered and regrouped, using evasive maneuvers that the Zephyrians had never encountered. Lieutenant Commander Stone, coordinating the battle from Hayes's flagship, watched the tactical displays with satisfaction. They're doing exactly what we predicted, Admiral. Straight line attacks, perfect formations, no tactical flexibility. Execute Plan Delta, Hayes ordered. The human fleet suddenly split into dozens of smaller groups, each attacking the Zephyrian formation from a different angle. The kinetic weapons that Carter had designed struck the golden ships with devastating effect. Zephyrian shields that could absorb energy beams were useless against high-speed metal projectiles. Captain Morrison's Defiance played its part perfectly, providing targeting data that allowed human ships to coordinate their attacks with precision. The Zephyrians found themselves fighting not one battle, but dozens of smaller engagements, each one designed to exploit their tactical weaknesses. Commander Zexhai, who had survived the battle at New Denver Colony, watched in horror as his forces took heavy casualties. The humans were fighting like no species he had ever encountered. They used deception, coordination, and tactical innovation to turn every Zephyrian advantage into a liability. Divine Archon, he reported to Zelenara. The humans are not fighting according to any known pattern. They attack and withdraw before we can respond. They coordinate their movements across the entire battlefield. Our standard tactics are proving ineffective. Zelenara's calm expression finally showed a crack of uncertainty. In 3,000 years of conquest, no enemy had ever forced the Zephyrian Empire to change its tactics. Increase firepower, she ordered. Destroy them through sheer force. But the humans had prepared for that response as well. As the Zephyrians concentrated their firepower on human positions, they found themselves walking into carefully prepared traps. The news of the Zephyrian defeat at Tau Ceti spread across the galaxy faster than anyone had expected. On worlds that had been enslaved for centuries, beings who had never known freedom began to whisper about the humans who had made the gods. Bleed dot on the world of Kepler 442b, a planet the Zephyrians called Servitude Prime. The local population had served their divine masters for over 800 years. The Villani people had built great temples to honor their gods and had never questioned their right to rule. But now, as news of the space battle reached them through hidden communication networks, everything began to change. Kethmer stood in the shadows of the great temple, watching Zephyrian priests perform their daily ceremonies. He was an elderly Villani with gray fur and wise yellow eyes. For 60 years he had served in the temple, believing that the Zephyrians were truly divine beings sent to guide lesser species. Now he knew the truth. The gods were not gods at all. They were mortals, just like everyone else. And mortals could be defeated. Kethmer, whispered a young voice behind him. It was Yenesi, his granddaughter, who worked in the temple's communication center. I have received another message from the resistance networks. 17 worlds have begun uprisings against their Zephyrian rulers. Kethmore felt something he had not experienced in decades. Hope. What are they saying? They are sharing information about human military tactics. They are teaching each other how to fight back. The humans have sent instructors to help coordinate the rebellions. On the other side of the galaxy, Captain Kate Williams was leading one of those coordination missions. She commanded a small fleet of human ships that had been modified for stealth operations. Her mission was to reach enslaved worlds and help their populations organize resistance movements. Williams was a woman in her 30s with short red hair and green eyes. She had served in the Colonial Defense Forces and had fought in the battle at New Denver Colony. Now she was using everything she had learned to help other species fight for their freedom. Her ship, the U's Liberation, dropped out of faster than light. Travel in the outer system of Kepler 442b, the planet was heavily defended by Zephyrian forces, but Williams had learned to use their own predictability against them. Lieutenant Davis, she said to her communications officer, are you picking up any signals from the resistance? Lieutenant Mike Davis was a young man with dark skin and bright eyes. He had been working to establish contact with rebel groups across the galaxy. Yes, ma'am. They're using the frequency patterns we taught them. The signal is coming from the planet's northern continent. Williams studied the tactical display. The Zephyrian defense fleet was positioned exactly where she had expected it to. B. After centuries of facing no real threats, they had become lazy and predictable. Take us in using approach pattern 7, she ordered. Avoid their sensor grids and get us close enough to establish secure communications. The Liberation slipped through the Zephyrian defenses like a knife through silk. The enemy ships were looking for massive fleets and direct attacks, not small. Stealthy vessels using advanced human technology. Once in position, Williams established contact with the Resistance. The face that appeared on her screen was that of an elderly alien with gray fur and yellow eyes. "I am Kethmer," he said through the translation system. "We have been waiting for you." "I'm Captain Williams. We're here to help you organize your resistance movement. How many people are ready to fight?" "Thousands," Kethmer replied. "But we do not know how to fight a war. We have been servants for so long that we have forgotten how to be warriors." Williams smiled. "That's why we're here. We're going to teach you everything we know about fighting gods." The training began immediately. Human military advisors worked with local rebels to establish secure communication networks, plan coordinated attacks, and develop tactics suited to each world's unique conditions. Sergeant Carlos Mendez, one of Williams's Marines, found himself teaching guerrilla warfare to a group of Villani rebels. The aliens were eager to learn but had no experience with military thinking. "The key to fighting the Zephyrians," he explained, "is to never fight them the way they expect. They're used to formal battles with clear rules. We're going to teach you to break all those rules." The rebels learned quickly. Within days, they were conducting sabotage missions against Zephyrian installations. They destroyed communication towers, disrupted supply lines, and spread propaganda that undermined the divine authority of their rulers. Similar scenes were playing out on dozens of worlds across the galaxy. Species that had been enslaved for centuries were learning to fight back, and they were using human tactics to do it, but the Zephyrians were not completely helpless. High Archon Zelenara, still reeling from the defeat at Tau Ceti, recognized that her empire was facing its greatest crisis in 3,000 years. She stood in her private chambers aboard her flagship, staring out at the stars. Her usual confidence had been shaken by the human victory, but she still possessed the will to rule. "Commander Veltar," she said to her aide, "summon the Council of Divinity. We must discuss the current crisis." The Council of Divinity was composed of the highest-ranking Zephyrians in the Empire. They met in a great hall filled with holographic displays showing the rebellions that were spreading across their territory. Veltar activated the main display. Red markers appeared on the galactic map, each one representing a world in rebellion. There were too many to count. "Divine Archon," said Council Member Hexenal, "we are facing coordinated uprisings on 37 worlds. The rebels are using human tactics and human technology. Our traditional responses are proving inadequate." Zelenara studied the display. She had never seen anything like this in her long life. The empire that had seemed so stable was crumbling before her eyes. "What do our military commanders recommend?" she asked. "They suggest increasing our military presence on rebellious worlds and making examples of rebel leaders. But every time we deploy forces to suppress one rebellion, 3 more begin elsewhere." Another council member, Jextai, spoke up. "Divine Archon, perhaps we should consider negotiating with the humans. If we could convince them to stop supporting the rebellions, we might be able to restore order." Zelenara's black eyes flashed with anger. "Negotiate? We are gods. We do not negotiate with mortals." But even as she spoke the words, she knew that something fundamental had changed. The humans had proven that Zephyrians could be defeated in battle. That knowledge was spreading across the galaxy like a virus, infecting every species that had ever served the Empire. "No," she said finally. "We will not negotiate. We will not compromise. We will build a weapon so powerful that it will restore fear to the hearts of all who oppose us." She activated a secret holographic display that showed the plans for a massive space station. The station was enormous, larger than most planets, and it was armed with a weapon that could destroy entire star systems. "Behold," she said, "the divine Hammer, With this weapon, we will destroy the human homeworld and show the galaxy what happens to those who challenge the gods. The construction of the divine hammer began immediately. Zephyrian engineers worked around the clock to build the ultimate weapon, while the rebellions continued to spread across the Empire on Earth. Admiral Hayes received intelligence reports about the superweapon from her scout ships. The news was disturbing but not unexpected. "They're building it in the Zephyr system," reported Commander Stone. "Our estimates suggest it will be operational within 6 months." Hayes studied the intelligence reports. The weapon was massive and heavily defended. A direct assault would be suicide, but allowing it to be completed would mean the end of Earth. "What about the rebellions?" she asked. "They're growing stronger every day. Captain Williams reports that the resistance movements are coordinating their activities across multiple systems. The Zephyrians are having to divide their forces to deal with uprisings everywhere." Hayes smiled grimly. "Then we need to accelerate the timeline. If we can coordinate a galaxy-wide rebellion with a direct assault on their superweapon, we might be able to end this war before they can complete their ultimate weapon." She opened a communication channel to all human forces and their alien allies. "This is Admiral Hayes. We are preparing for the final battle. The Zephyrians are building a weapon that could destroy Earth and end the rebellion. We have one chance to stop them." Across the galaxy, on worlds that had been enslaved for centuries, the message was received with determination. The time for hiding and small-scale resistance was over. The final battle for freedom was about to begin. Kethmer stood before a gathering of Villani rebels in the ruins of an ancient temple. Around him, beings who had served the Zephyrians for generations prepared for war. "My people," he said, "we have lived as slaves for 800 years. Our parents were slaves and their parents before them. We have forgotten what it means to be free." He held up a small communication device that Captain Williams had given him. "But the humans have reminded us. They have shown us that gods can bleed, that empires can fall, and that freedom is worth any price." The crowd murmured in agreement. They were scared, but they were also angry. Angry at the centuries of servitude, angry at the lies they had been told, angry at the false gods who had stolen their dignity. The divine hammer hung in space above the Zephyrian capital world like a metal moon. The massive space station was larger than any structure ever built, bristling with weapons that could crack planets in half. High Archon Zelenara stood in its central command chamber, watching displays that showed her crumbling empire. Rebellions were spreading faster than her forces could contain them. 43 worlds were now in open revolt, and more joined the rebellion every day, but none of that mattered anymore. In a few hours, she would demonstrate the true power of the gods by destroying Earth itself. "Divine Archon," reported Commander Veltar, "the weapon is fully charged and ready to fire. Our targeting computers have locked onto the human homeworld." Zelenara smiled with cold satisfaction. "Excellent. Open a communication channel to the entire galaxy. All species will witness what happens to those who defy divine will." Far across space, Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, leading the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. 60 ships from Earth were joined by vessels from a dozen rebel species. The odds were still terrible, but this was their only chance. "Admiral," reported Lieutenant Commander Stone, "we're detecting massive energy buildup from the Zephyrian superweapon. If our calculations are correct, it will be ready to fire in less than 4 hours." Hayes nodded grimly. "Signal all units. We go to maximum speed. Captain Morrison, are your teams ready?" Morrison's voice came through the communication system. From the Defiance. "Strike teams are prepared, Admiral. We'll disable their primary systems while you keep their fleet busy." The plan was desperate but simple. The main fleet would engage the Zephyrian defenders while small strike teams infiltrated the Divine Hammer. If they could overload the station's power systems, the resulting explosion would destroy the superweapon and cripple the remaining Zephyrian forces. As the human fleet approached the Zephyr system, they were joined by ships from across the galaxy. The Kaleri had sent their fastest vessels. The Villani brought ships that had been hidden from their masters for centuries. Even species that had served the Zephyrians for thousands of years were now fighting for their freedom. Kethmer stood on the bridge of a converted Villani transport ship, watching the human fleet through the main viewer. At his age, he had never expected to see a real space battle, much less participate in one. "Grandfather," said his granddaughter Yennecy, "are you afraid?" The old Villani considered the question. "Yes, child. But I am more afraid of living as a slave than I am of dying as a free being." The battle began when the combined fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Zephyr system. The Zephyrian defense fleet was waiting for them, arranged in perfect formation around their SUPERWEPON. High Archon Selenara open communications with the attacking forces. Her image appeared on screens throughout the rebel fleet, her silver skin glowing with inner light and her black eyes reflecting cold hatred. "Mortals and traitors," she said, "you have come to witness the power of true gods. Watch as we erase the human homeworld from existence. Let this be a lesson to all who would challenge divine authority." Admiral Hayes responded from the Retribution. "This is Admiral Susan Hayes of the Free Galaxy Alliance. We reject your false claims of divinity. Today, the galaxy learns what happens when tyrants try to call themselves gods." The communication ended, and the final battle began. The Zephyrian fleet attacked in their traditional formation, golden ships moving with perfect coordination. But they faced an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. The Rebel Alliance fought with human tactics, using coordination and flexibility to turn Zephyrian strengths into weaknesses. Captain Morrison led the Defiance and two other ships on a desperate run toward the Divine Hammer. They used the chaos of the main battle to slip past the outer defenses, dodging energy beams and missile barrages that could have vaporized their ships. "Chief Carter," Morrison called to his engineer, "how long do we have once we're inside?" Lisa Carter checked her calculations one more time. "If we can overload their main reactor, the explosion will take about 15 minutes to build to critical levels. After that, nothing in this system will survive?" Tactical Officer Ryan Brooks was piloting the ship through the station's defensive grid. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures from their weapon systems. They're preparing to fire." Earth, Morrison felt ice in his veins. If the Divine Hammer fired before they could stop it, 8 billion people would die. "How long? Less than an hour, sir." The Defiance docked with the Divine Hammer through an emergency airlock that Carter had located in the station's schematics. Morrison led a team of Marines into the heart of the enemy stronghold while his ship provided covering fire for the main battle. The corridors of the Divine Hammer were enormous, designed to intimidate visitors with their scale and grandeur. Morrison's team moved quickly through the empty passages. Following Carter's directions toward the reactor core, they encountered their first resistance, near the station's central hub. Zephyrian guards in their liquid metal armor tried to stop the human infiltrators, but they had never faced enemies who used human military tactics in close-quarters combat. Sergeant Tony Martinez, who had fought at New Denver Colony, led the assault on the Zephyrian positions. The enemy soldiers expected formal combat with clear rules and predictable patterns. Instead, they faced coordinated teamwork that used every advantage of terrain and timing. "Move fast and stay together," Martinez called to his Marines. "These guys still think war is a ceremony." Meanwhile, the space battle raged around the Divine Hammer. Admiral Hayes coordinated her forces with skill born from years of experience. While rebel ships from across the galaxy fought alongside human vessels, the Zephyrian fleet was larger and more powerful, but they were fighting multiple enemies using tactics they had never encountered. Every time they tried to concentrate their forces, rebel ships struck from unexpected directions. Commander Pete Jackson, now serving aboard a new ship called the UES Vengeance, led a squadron of vessels in a direct assault on the Zephyrian flagship. His ships moved in coordinated patterns that confused and disrupted enemy formations. "All units, target their command ship," Jackson ordered. "If we can take out their leadership, their whole formation will collapse." On the surface of the Divine Hammer, Morrison's team finally reached the reactor core. The chamber was vast, filled with machinery that hummed with barely contained energy. At the center stood the main reactor, a sphere of pure power that supplied energy to the station's planet-killing weapon. Carter studied the control systems with her portable computer. "Captain, I can overload the reactor, but someone needs to stay behind to make sure the sequence completes. The Zephyrians will try to abort the overload once they realize what's happening." Morrison looked around at his team. They were all good people who had families waiting for them back on Earth, but someone had to make the sacrifice. "I'll stay," he said. "No, sir," Carter replied. "This is an engineering problem. I'm the best qualified to handle it." Before Morrison could argue, alarms began sounding throughout the station. The Zephyrians had discovered the infiltration and were sending security forces to stop them. "Go!" Carter shouted, already working at the control console. "Get everyone else out of here." Morrison wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. He led his remaining team toward the evacuation point while Carter began the reactor overload sequence. In the main command chamber of the Divine Hammer, High Archon Zelenara watched the battle displays with growing fury. Her perfect plan was falling apart. The rebel fleet was holding their own against her forces, and now intruders had somehow reached her weapons power core. "Commander Veltar," she ordered, "send all available security forces to the reactor level. Stop the humans at any cost," but it was too late. Carter's sabotage was already taking effect. Warning lights flashed throughout the station as power systems began to overload. "Divine Archon," reported a technician, "we're detecting massive power fluctuations in the main reactor. The containment systems are failing." Zelenara stared at the displays in disbelief. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire had seemed invincible. Now it was being destroyed by beings she had dismissed as primitive mortals. "All ships, retreat to minimum safe distance," she ordered. "Abandon the station." But many of her ships couldn't disengage from the battle quickly enough. The rebel forces pressed their attack. Preventing an organized withdrawal, Morrison's team reached their ship just as the reactor overload entered its final phase. The Defiance pulled away from the Divine Hammer, racing to reach safe distance. Before the explosion, Chief Engineer Carter remained at her post in the reactor chamber, ensuring that the overload sequence would complete successfully. As alarms screamed around her, she thought about Earth and the billions of people who would live because of what she was doing. The explosion, when it came, was visible from 3-star systems away. The Divine Hammer, the ultimate weapon of the Zephyrian Empire, vanished in a flash of light that outshone the local sun. The blast wave destroyed dozens of Zephyrian ships and crippled many more. High Archon Zelenara's flagship survived the explosion, but barely. Half of her fleet was gone, and the rest were scattered and damaged. For the first time in 3,000 years,